Hello, everyone. Carter Krishnar here for the Florida Squeeze. Ever since I've been a kid, I've heard people on the left call people on the right fascists. I've heard people on the right call people on the left communists here in this country. And none of it has ever been true to me, right? I mean, there's someone who's very steeped in history, he writes about history, and has worked in politics for 30 years. I think that there are very strict definitions of these things that are not met by just about anyone in the American political system. And I did find it kind of amusing that Donald Trump ran ads calling Kamala Harris a communist, when in fact you could argue no president in recent American history has aspired for more state control of the economy, in kind of even like nationalizing things in a way. If you talk about state subsidies for certain American industries, and then protective tariffs to prevent competition for those American companies, and on and on and on, manipulating the currency, interfering in the Federal Reserve's independence. That actually, to me, would put Trump on kind of like the extreme left in terms of economics in some ways. More socialist and communist than anything Kamala Harris has ever done. A lot of people say Trump is a fascist, right? General John Kelly has said Trump is a fascist. I think he has authoritarian instincts, but I didn't see fascism in practice in his first term. I'm sorry, I had to say that, in spite of what a lot of people say. Now, where I have seen what I would consider fascism in practice in the United States is here in Florida in the last few years, from Governor Ron DeSantis. I'm just going to rattle off a couple of things Ron DeSantis has done, which I think are above what Donald Trump has done. Donald Trump tweets a lot, and now I guess truths a lot on Truth Social, and so he mocks people. He's very uncouth and inappropriate, right? And I think maybe the debasement of American culture that began in the 1960s and 1970s was always going to culminate in a charlatan, a uncouth, unrefined, unserious person like Donald Trump maybe becoming president. That does not make him a fascist. It makes him, I think, a horrible person. Doesn't make him a fascist. But here are some things that Ron DeSantis has done here in Florida that rise to a higher level than anything Trump did in his first White House term. Creating the election police. Creating the election police, right? And threatening to using those election police to prosecute people for exercising their franchise, and a few of the prosecutions have been based around flimsy evidence or confusing evidence, or voters, people not knowing their rights, right? Because of course we passed a constitutional amendment to restore rights to people who had previously lost their rights, felons and others. That if the communication isn't right, someone thinks they have the right to vote, they cast a provisional ballot, and then the next thing you know, the cops are hauling them off. I mean, it's just enough not to count the provisional ballot if their rights haven't been restored. You don't have to haul them off. But Ron DeSantis has done that. The threats to television stations who about pro Amendment 4 this past year, this past election cycle, Amendment 4, the pro-choice amendment, the pro-abortion amendment, threats to TV stations, threats to journalists about that stuff, direct threats. Trump has tweeted stuff. Trump maybe has mocked people, but this is serious, like threatening television stations, implying maybe you can get their license pulled. Ron DeSantis has done that. Threats to university professors pulling their punches and saying we're going to have to pull our punches or pull back from certain critiques, pull back from certain analysis because we're at public universities in the state of Florida, and the state boards have been stacked by DeSantis appointees, and DeSantis has politicized academia in the state. Not only have we lost academic freedom, that seems to be a thing Republicans do frequently all over the place, but there has been a crackdown on intellectuals in the state of Florida, a direct crackdown, which resembles what happens in fascist regimes in Eastern Europe and authoritarian regimes in Asia and Africa. Crackdown on intellectuals, okay? Trump, again, is a boob. He's kind of uncouth, but I haven't seen that. subverting of the independence of the universities. Each university has had this situation where they lose their independence because DeSantis has stacked the board. He's basically picked the presidents. Senator Ben Sasse, when he was made the president of the University of Florida, it was not a transparent process. They came up with one candidate, which was him. And as we see, he was incredibly unqualified to be the president of a large flagship state university, land grant university, and brought the university into great disrepute. In addition to violating all sorts of ethical principles, right? We thought Sasse was a principled conservative when he was in the U.S. Senate, partly because he had expressed reservations about Donald Trump and voted to convict him in his Senate trial. But in fact, he's just a grifter that benefited from this authoritarian creep in Florida. I have to tell you, in the 2020 campaign, 2024 campaign, when I was involved in election defense on the Democratic side, there were no lawyers who said, hey, we don't really want to help the Democrats. We don't want to help Biden. We don't want to help Harris. We don't want to help whoever in the Democrats because we're scared of retribution from Donald Trump. There wasn't one. And they all put themselves on the line if they could. 2022, there were lawyers who came back to me, maybe advised by others in their firm, hey, we don't really want to put ourselves on the line against Ron DeSantis because if our name is on something, DeSantis is coming after us. And speaking of that, DeSantis is a guy who has, when the courts have ruled against him or against the state law, has more than once said, the judge doesn't know what they're doing. I know the law better than the judge. I'm not going to abide by an injunction, or I'm not going to abide by how a court ruled. Trump says things like that, but I mean, like DeSantis, given the rest of his track record, he means it when he says it. The intimidating of private companies. I mean, this is something that fascists do. Private industry becomes subservient, and maybe this is where Trump is kind of fascist, although I said it was, to me, more leftist. This private companies being made subservient to government. Private companies and their private business being interfered with by the government. Disney is the most obvious example of this. And that shook up some doctrinaire conservatives. That's when they realized DeSantis wasn't one of them. They had thought he was an alternative to Trump before. And then they realized, oh, shoot, he's actually Trump on steroids. But there's more. The intimidation of journalists. Now, this is a really interesting one because Trump tweets mean things about journalists, right? He'll tweet, oh, such and such from CNN is an idiot, right? Or whatever. But DeSantis has basically ID'd reporters and had reporters thrown out of press conferences, banned media outlets from press conferences, and has even had a situation where one of his communications people, one of his press secretaries, basically created an online lynch mob toward an AP reporter, Brendan Farrington, that drove that reporter out of his job for several weeks, months really. And it was an awful scene. I don't remember that yet happening with Trump. Maybe it has, but I don't. I don't remember it happening. Actually, the Bush administration in the federal level, Bush Cheney administration, used to do things like that every now and then. They did some terrible things like that, but not quite to this level that what happened to Brendan Farrington. That was really something else. We've also had a situation where we've had media outlets get threatened because they're reporting about DeSantis in a certain way. And what DeSantis has done, which I thought might benefit him in his race against Donald Trump, is he has helped create an alternative set of media sites. Now, if you think, oh, well, the Republicans have done that on a national level with Fox News and Newsmax and Daily Caller, right? That was Tucker Carlson's creation, et cetera, et cetera. That is sort of true. But let me tell you what DeSantis has done with things like the Florida Voice News and the Capitalist, and there's one other one. He has created He has had funding that has created specific pro-DeSantis sites. They masquerade as conservative Republican sites, but they're pro-DeSantis sites that effectively become the de facto press organ for the administration. They get all the exclusives with the administration. They get the news leaks from the administration. They take shots at other Republicans who DeSantis may not like, which probably is going to include the incoming chief of staff for the Trump administration, Susie Wiles. DeSantis loathes her. These are sites that were created out of thin air by people who I don't think were even living in Florida when Rick Scott was the governor. There are people who recently moved to Florida, have no institutional knowledge. The site's loyalties are completely to DeSantis. Whereas this conservative media infrastructure we talk about that's thrown in with Trump, it pre-existed Trump, okay? It was very clearly an alternative news media to counter the New York Times and NBC and CNN and what the right considered the mainstream left media. But DeSantis has actually created his own media ecosystem. He's a very, very dangerous guy, and I think he hits the definition of fascist. Does Trump? I really don't know. I'm open to, maybe in his second term he will do some of the things because the template's clear now. DeSantis created the template, and maybe Trump just follows it. Or maybe Trump with Susie Wiles in there, she was in the DeSantis administration also. She had a falling out with him. Maybe she keeps Trump not on the straight and narrow. Trump cannot be kept on the straight and narrow, but keeps him away from some of these things that I've talked about, which are just, look, if you want to know about fascism in a Western democracy, not in Viktor Orban's Hungary or Erdogan's Turkey or Putin's Russia or Modi's India, right? These are all kind of democracies, but they're kind of illiberal states to begin with, let's face it. Turkey's illiberalism we can blame on the United States, right? We're the ones who always authored military coups in that country in the past. But those other countries are all kind of just, partially illiberal states. But if you want to see an example of it implemented in the United States, you come to Florida. Okay? Ron DeSantis. Yeah, I think he crosses the line. I think you use the F word with him.